108. Selves Inside You. Buddhism on Desire's Tricks. As we practice, we try to focus our desires on one thing, the ending of suffering. But the nature of the mind is that its desires tend to head off in lots of different directions, like the man who jumped on a horse and rode off in 4 directions all at once. Our desires to pull us here, pull us there, and we try to find some unity to them, some way of making them not work at cross purposes all the time. So we like the idea that we have one self that has one genuine desire or set of desires that are all in harmony. That's one way of trying to bring some order to our desires, asking ourselves, who's the real me in here? That, we think, should help us establish our priorities. But as the Buddha noticed, when you try to find the real me, there are lots of me's in there. It's somewhat arbitrary as to which ones you're going to choose. Many desires, many selves. As you may have noticed, every desire leads to becoming, which is a sense of self in a world of experience. It's focused on a desired object, something you want, say an ice cream cone. Then there's a world in which that ice cream cone exists. All the aspects of the world outside that are relevant to the ice cream cone, either helping you get it or getting in the way, are part of that particular becoming. Everything that's not relevant to the ice cream cone is absent in that world. Then you enter into that world as the person who's going to get the ice cream cone, the person who can either make the ice cream or buy the ice cream, and the person who's going to enjoy it. On top of that, there's always the self as commentator saying, "Are you doing this well? How might you do it differently? Is it really worth doing?" So every desire has 3 senses of self right there. Every desire has a world. But rather than trying to find unity among these things by defining yourself as a unitary thing, a unitary self, the Buddha said, let's learn how to look at the process by which these worlds and these senses of self get put together. Learn to look at them in impersonal terms. That's why we have dependent co-arising, the Buddha's analysis of how to look at events in the mind simply as events in the mind before you've slapped a sense of self or world on them. Learn how to look them in impersonal ways. See where there are perceptions or thought fabrications or feelings that go together to build up this state of becoming. All kinds of things go into this. When we learn these impersonal terms, we realize that if we look at our desires impersonally, it's a lot easier to pull ourselves out of them. That's what we're trying to do as we meditate. We're trying to bring the mind to a state where you're dealing directly with events in the mind. You're holding to a perception of the breath. The breath, of course, is an aspect of the form of the body. You hold on to a perception that allows you to breathe in a way that feels comfortable. You'll also be thinking about the breath and adjusting the breath, evaluating it. That's called fabrication. And you're aware of these things. That's consciousness. There are also intentions that keep you here. There are acts of attention. What are you going to pay attention to? What are you going to ignore? You learn to look at your mind in impersonal terms. The problem is that a sense of self can move in here as well, and it can be either helpful or not helpful. A helpful sense of self is one that says, I can do this. I'll take on this duty. I find it an interesting challenge and I'm going to enjoy it. Then there's the inner critic that can be either well-trained or ill-trained with regard to the meditation. The ill-trained one gives up at the slightest disturbance. You're trying to focus on the breath, and yet the mind seems to want to focus on anything but the breath. Then you tie this into your narratives about what a miserable meditator you are, and then from that, what a miserable person you are in general, and it can expand, expand, expand. That's not very helpful. It's better to think about times in the past when you've faced difficulties but were able to overcome them. Or you were working on a skill that you really wanted to develop. really wanted to master, and you had enough interest in it to face whatever challenges there were and be up for the challenge. That's the kind of self you want to develop around the meditation. But notice, we're not trying to find a unitary self here. Many psychologists, many philosophers talk about how we have to unify the self, as if they see the divided self as the big problem. But the Buddha says the big problem is that we have divided desires. Our desires don't have any clear sense of priority. If we can focus our desires on solving this one problem, the problem of creating suffering, all our other problems are going to evaporate. In other words, there may still be problems in the world outside, but they don't weigh us down. We don't suffer from them. That's the important thing. From that perspective, the Buddha is perfectly fine with the fact that we have many different selves. The question is, which ones are you going to use and which ones are you not going to use to foster skillful desires? As you take them apart, it's important to realize that you're going to be dealing with many different people in here. All too many meditators try to streamline the practice by saying, well, there's no self to begin with, so just tell yourself that there's no self, and whatever comes up, put aside your sense of self and you'll be okay. But you don't have one sense of self, you have many. And as you practice, you're going to find that some of the selves inside really enjoy the meditation and some don't. You have to deal with the ones that don't on an individual basis. In other words, you're going to be dealing with individual desires, which have their individual allure and their individual drawbacks. There are some general outlines to the drawbacks. One is that everything that you could possibly identify with is going to be inconstant, stressful, and not self. But you can say those words over and over again, and they may not have any impact at all. As the Buddha said, you have to look specifically as to what the allure is for that particular desire, that particular sense of self. Say a particular instance of anger comes up. Why does the mind like to be angry about those specific things? Sometimes it's out of fear, sometimes it's out of desire. Fear of what? Desire of what? Clinging to what? You want to be really clear about this, because if you're not clear about the allure, then you can talk about the drawbacks from dawn to dusk, from dusk to dawn, and they won't have much impact because they don't focus directly on what the attraction is. The same with lust. We tell ourselves that we lust for a particular body, but is it just the body? Is it your perception of the body? A lot of it has to do with your perceptions, because our perceptions are like sketches. There's no perception of the world or even of yourself, your own body, that could encompass all the details. So we live with cartoons. That's why cartoons are so effective at expressing emotions. They focus on the specific details of an emotion, and they erase all the irrelevant parts. The bad part is that we live within these cartoons and they control us. As a result, you're usually in love with a cartoon. You lust for a cartoon. This is one of the reasons why interpersonal relationships are so fraught. The person you love thinks that you love him or her, but then they find out, no, it's something else. You're in love with a perception of them, a thought construct about them, or about you in relation to them. Or you may just be in love with the idea of being in love. That's not much of a foundation to build any kind of solid relationship on. So you've got to see the specific points of the allure. This is why the Buddha says you want to locate the craving. Where is your craving located? Where is it focused? For that particular instance of anger, that particular instance of lust. If you've gotten past one instance of anger, don't think you've taken care of all types of anger, because you may have many different triggers. Lust may have many different ways of drawing you in, attracting you, being alluring. After all, it's been around for a long, long time. It's learned a lot of tricks. It can hijack your breath. Every time it comes up, it can create a sense of tightness in the body, something in the body that you can't stand. You say, I've got to get this out of my system. It's amazing how this applies not only to anger, where we talk about getting anger out of our system, but to all our emotions. The way we breathe has been hijacked by our defilements in a subconscious way. By breathing in a particular way, we've already gone over and sided with them. Then they say, "Give in to me now. It's going to get worse. It's going to get stronger until you explode, so give in now. And you know you're going to give in at one point anyhow, so why don't you make it easy for both of us?" These defilements have lots of different tricks. So for each type of anger, each type of lust, or whatever the unskillful emotion it's going to be, you have to see what specifically is the allure, and which particular self have you created around that allure. You'll find that you don't have an infinite number of selves or an infinite number of desires. The number that keeps getting thrown out by the canon is 108. Of course, there are more than that, but it gives you an idea. There are lots, but they're not infinite. This is one of the reasons why the practice takes a while. You're dealing with specific instances of allures and specific instances of how to figure out how to see the drawback of those allures. We're not dealing with abstractions here. We're dealing with specifics. We're not dealing with one self. We're dealing with many selves. As long as you learn how to see each self as an activity, a part of this process of becoming, it's a lot easier to let go of these things. It's not as if you're tearing yourself up or totally negating yourself. You're just trying to create some order in this committee or this crowd inside, so that you can train the parts of the mind that can be trained to be focused on this one issue, putting an end to suffering. That's where the unity lies, willing one thing above all other things and then submitting all your other desires to that. It's called determination. As the Buddha pointed out, determination has 4 qualities. First, it has to have discernment. In other words, you have to see clearly which desires are in line with your overarching determination, which ones are not, and what's a good determination to begin with. Second, you have to be true to it. You have to be honest with yourself about which of your desires are actually in compliance and which ones are not. Third, you have to be willing to relinquish anything that's not in line with that overarching desire. Finally, as the Buddha said, you train only for calm, trying to find a way of bringing the mind to calm as you're practicing, finding what's disturbing the mind, looking for those disturbances, seeing what's causing them, being willing to put them aside. It's by having this overarching determination that you can find some unity, and your desires do all come together, the ones you finally train to bring you to the ultimate calm. That's the unity we're looking for, but it requires that we deal with a lot of specifics. And because you have so many different desires, so many different selves, you're going to have to learn all their various tricks. So don't get discouraged when you've given up, say, one specific instance of lust, only to find that another one comes up, or one bout of anger and another one comes up. Realize that they're not all the same thing. The allure may be different. The focus may be different. So take that as a challenge, as part of the skill. And take heart from the fact that these various tricks of the defilements are not infinite. They may seem to be a lot, but as you get to know them better, you get better and better at detecting them quickly and dealing with them quickly as well. You do develop skill as you keep focused on this. So take heart. It's not an endless job. In fact, it's one of the few things in the world that actually does come to an end. And the end is more than worth whatever effort it takes to get there. Mind storms. There's a part of the mind that's just aware, no matter what else comes into the mind: greed, anger, delusion, despair, depression, regret, or fear. It's just part of the mind. There's also another part that's just aware of these things, but it tends to get blocked out when strong emotions come in. Still, it's always there, like the hum of the refrigerator always there in the background. Or maybe a better analogy would be the hum of the Big Bang, the deep B flat that's still detectable from all directions all the time. One of the tricks of the meditation is learning to get in touch with that part of the mind, not to regard it as something exotic, but to have it as the background state of mind, the basis of your conscious awareness. This requires a shift of your center of gravity because, for the most part, we tend to live in our emotions, in our creations, in the little worlds we create for ourselves. But as the Buddha pointed out, there's a lot of suffering in those worlds. They all require effort to keep them going. They have to feed off of something. When the Buddha says that becoming is conditioned by clinging, the word clinging can also mean feeding or the act of taking sustenance. And the sustenance is the passion of desire. The desire that makes us create these worlds, that pulls us into these worlds and impels us to take them as far as they can go. There's always an act of feeding going on, and it's stressful. So you've got to learn how to get out of those little worlds you've created for yourself. Otherwise, you can create huge emotional storms that can blow you away. People talk about sitting and meditating and being blown away to the point where they can't even sit anymore. But if you actually look at the wind from the outside, there's no physical wind blowing them off the seat. It's just that they let these emotional storms get blown up in the mind and they put themselves in the storms. So, of course, they're going to get blown around. What's important to remember is that there's always an awareness surrounding the storms. If you can place your center of gravity in that awareness, you don't get blown away. It's not that difficult to get out of the storms if you can observe them as they arise, as they're just beginning, but they're hard to extract yourself from if they're already full-blown. So you need to learn how to change your center of gravity in advance and keep it changed. Otherwise, the secondary storms, the ones that blow in on the tail of the first storm, can catch you off guard. One of the problems is the impatience that blows up as a separate storm. You get impatient. When are these storms going to go away? And then you place yourself in that second storm, the impatient storm, and that can blow you away as well. Or you can get swept up in a storm of boredom. A lot of these secondary storms are the ones that throw meditators off balance, so you have to watch out for them. Remember that there's a space around those storms as well. You have to learn how to watch those from the outside too. A great deal of the commentary going on in the mind is just this sort of thing. You pull yourself out of the storms whirling around events from the past or future, but then you let yourself get caught up in storms of the present. When these things come up, regret or impatience or whatever, just watch them. They may seem awfully powerful and awfully real, but you can learn to question their reality. Remember that although there may be a reality to these things, it's a created reality, false, artificial. It's something you're creating right now, and you may not even be aware of what you're doing. Back when I was younger, I used to like to write fiction. Basically, what a fiction writer does is to inhabit a little mental world, exploring what it feels like from inside. The more real you can make that world to yourself, the better the story when you write it down. What's uncanny about these worlds is that sometimes a character you create can surprise you. The more real the character becomes in your mind, the more it can start doing unexpected things. When that happens, you start thinking, maybe this character has its own reality, but it's actually a figment of your own imagination. The reason these characters can surprise you is the same reason that you get surprised by things coming into the mind in normal, world-creating thoughts. You're so oblivious to what you're doing that it can actually surprise you. That's when these thoughts begin to seem very real, to have an independent existence. What's happened, though, is that the part of your mind creating them is behind a wall, separated from the part that's watching them. That's why they can take unexpected turns. This is why we have to get the mind really, really quiet, both so that we can get closer and closer to the part of the mind that simply observes, and to get clearer about where these fabrications are coming from. When you can see that second part in operation, it offers no surprises. And when you get to the point where fabrications offer no surprises, you start getting disenchanted with them. You see them for all their artificiality. You can begin to pull yourself out of their worlds more and more consistently. So whatever storms come brewing up in the mind, remember, it's just an event in your awareness, and there's an awareness surrounding it outside of the storm. Learn how to give more weight to that awareness than to the storms. If you're going to identify with anything, and it's natural that we do identify with things all along the path, learn how to identify with that very still awareness. It may not seem very intelligent, very creative, but it's your salvation. It's what you can hold on to that'll keep you from getting blown away. How many times have you seen people who are very clever, very imaginative, very creative, and then something takes on an independent life in their minds and they can actually end up killing themselves simply because of their thought creations? They find themselves pushed into all sorts of weird and self-destructive behavior simply because they can't let go of particular thought worlds in their minds. So for the survival of all that's good and worthwhile in your own mind, you've got to learn how to step out of these things, realizing that although that simple awareness may not seem interesting or clever, it's your real friend. And there's a wisdom in learning how to stay there and watch, not to be impatient to get results, not to be impatient to see how things turn out. Learn how to be more stable in that watching, because the stability is what will allow you to see very subtle things, to see the tricks the mind plays on itself, the places where it pulls the curtain down or throws up walls to maintain its illusions. Your steady gaze is what's going to enable you to see through those illusions. In the early stages of the meditation, that basic watcher, the observer, may seem as unstable and as fragile as any of the other worlds you might create. But as you get more and more used to placing your center of gravity here, you find that it's a lot easier to stay here than to keep creating those other worlds. This awareness, too, is a kind of world, and there will come a point where you have to take it apart, but in the meantime, this is the most stable world at your disposal. Over time, your center of gravity can begin to shift more and more in this direction. Once it's here, the qualities of stability and patience and endurance come a lot easier, and you come to value them more. Although they themselves may not seem all that surprising or entertaining, they do allow you to find out some very surprising things about the mind. In particular, you learn how to see through this process of creation. Where do these worlds come from? This is how the Buddha discovered dependent co-arising, by just watching very patiently, putting himself in a position where he didn't get blown away. It's like really good scholarship. Everyone wants to get in on the dialogue of common scholarly assumptions and show that, yes, they can engage in that dialogue as well. But the people who say, well, stop, wait a minute, these questions don't make sense, something's wrong here, those are the ones who bring a real advance in knowledge. When you step back to get out of a particular dialogue, you begin to see its underlying assumptions for what they are. The same thing goes on in the mind. There are little signals and signs that the mind sends to itself, and you feel clever in catching their meaning. Yes, I understand that signal. I understand that sign, I'll play along with that. And then you get sucked into the world of those signals and signs. But it takes real understanding not to get sucked in by the signals, to step out of the worlds that those signals create. Ajahn Suwat once said that one of his greatest insights in meditation was seeing how the mind liked to play make-believe with itself. You have these little internal signals and agreements. Well, this is this, and that's that. And suddenly, there's a whole world of becoming, just because you thought you were clever in interpreting and catching on to the signs. So sometimes it's good to play dumb, to say, I don't understand this doesn't make sense, and step back. That right there is a lot of the practice. Training your desires. All phenomena are rooted in desire. Everything we experience, the Buddha said, and we desire happiness. So the question is, why don't we get the happiness we desire? Because our desires are ignorant. We're ignorant of the way things work. We want to put in only a little effort or no effort at all and get a happiness that lasts. We've learned, of course, at least to some extent, that that doesn't always work. There's a large part of the mind that really doesn't like that. It's when we realize that we have to change our understanding of what works and doesn't work, and that we have to train our desires. That's when wisdom begins. We realize that we can't get everything we want the way we want it. We have to learn to choose what we really want more than anything else and focus on that. As the Buddha says, if you see that a greater happiness comes from letting go of a lesser happiness, and if you're wise, you're willing to let go of the lesser happiness for the sake of the greater. There was an English scholar who translated that verse one time, and in a footnote, he said that this couldn't possibly be what the verse means. It was just too simple, too obvious. Well, it may be obvious, but it's really not the way people live. We want to win at chess and keep all our pieces. We want our major desires and we want our little desires. We don't want to have to give anything up that we want. It's when we realize we do have to give certain things up and we have to prioritize that we begin to bring some knowledge to our desires. The Buddha said it's a several-step process. First, you realize that you need some training from other people who are more experienced than you are in terms of what brings true happiness, and you have to look for the right people. When you find someone who seems reliable, you have to watch that person for a good while. Ask yourself if there's anything in this person that would make this person want to claim knowledge of things he or she didn't know. Would this person ever get anyone else to do something that was not in that other person's best interest? It takes a while to observe a person to be able to judge this. But if you're truly serious about trying to find true happiness, you have to be responsible about who you choose to hang out with, who you choose to listen to, and who you choose as your friends. There have been so many cases of people finding out that their teachers are unreliable. But when you ask them what led up to the revelation, it turns out that there had been warning signs they chose to ignore. So there's a certain responsibility placed on the student to try to find a good teacher. Then you spend time with the teacher. When you have a sense that the teacher is trustworthy, you listen to what the teacher has to say. You think it over. When it makes sense, that's when the Buddha says you begin to have a desire to do the practice. The example of the teacher has shown you that it is possible to find true happiness, a higher happiness than what you already have. That gives you some impetus to want to make some changes in your behavior. Then you listen to the teachings, and if they make sense, that gives you even more impetus. A really good teaching opens up your perspective on what true happiness is so that you're willing to let go of lesser things. That's how the desire to practice begins. And that's why the Buddha defined ignorance as ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, not ignorance of the three characteristics, ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, because they revolve around desire. There's the unskillful desire that causes suffering. Then there's the skillful desire in the Noble Eightfold Path, under the factor of right effort that leads to the end of suffering. The skillful desire wants to develop all skillful qualities in the mind and abandon all unskillful qualities. That's the kind of desire you want to encourage. But the Four Noble Truths also set out the possibility of finding an ultimate happiness that's unchanging and true, total freedom. That is a human possibility, and the Four Noble Truths set it out clearly. They don't say, for instance, that you simply have to accept the fact that there's going to be change in life, so just accept the change, or that things are impermanent and stressful, so accept the impermanence and stress, or that things are not self, so accept that they're not self and content yourself with that. That's not what they say. The Four Noble Truths say that ultimate happiness is possible and can be gained through human effort, And the proper way to respond to that is to see it as a challenge. Here's a possibility as to what you can do. Do you want to accept that challenge? If so, look at the other things you've been doing in life that would get in the way. Can you learn how to say no to them? As the Buddha said, a measure of your wisdom is when there are things you like to do, but you know are going to lead to suffering or harm, and you can say no to them. Things you may not like to do, but you know are going to lead to long-term welfare and happiness. Teach yourself how to want to do those things. In this way, you're training your desires in the direction of a happiness that's really reliable, and it is possible. It can be done. There are people who found it, good people, reliable people. Now, you can't see their happiness. Ajahn Mahabhuwa said that if you could take Nibbana out and show it to everybody, that's the only thing anybody would ever want. Everything else in the world would pale by comparison, but you can't see someone else's experience of it. Still, you look at the people who seem to have found it, and they seem to be good people. That's the beginning of conviction. It's not knowledge, but it's conviction. The conviction that gives force to your desire to want to practice more. Otherwise, it might seem that nobody in the world is really awakened, or the best anybody can do is just accept things as they are and not try to make any changes. But then, what kind of effort would you want to put out? It would be very discouraging. There'd be no reason to make any effort at all, no desire to make any effort at all, and you'd be stuck where you are in a situation that's really not acceptable. When the Buddha talks about accepting things, it's not about accepting where you are and staying there. It's about accepting the fact that you're responsible for shaping your life and that things could be better if you trained yourself to shape your experience in a better way. That way, if you're going to look for the cause of suffering, you have to look inside. That's another message from the Four Noble Truths. Again, it's a message that we may not like to hear. We like to blame our suffering on other people, but think about it. If your suffering comes from other people, what are you going to do? Are you going to change them? And how many people in the world would you have to change? There'd be no end to it. But as the Buddha points out, suffering comes from our ignorant craving. And that's something we can do something about. Ignorance may have been long-lasting. As the Buddha said, you can't trace back in time to find the point where ignorance began, but it doesn't have any right to lay claim to you. Ajahn Suwat's image is of taking a light into a place that's been dark for who knows how long. The darkness can't say, "We've been here ever since time began, so this light has no right to chase us away." As soon as there's light, the darkness has to go. As soon as there's knowledge, your ignorance goes. Regardless of how ignorant you've been in the past, it's something you can change. The Four Noble Truths set a high standard, but they also promise a lot. They provide a path we can follow, and it leads to true happiness, ultimate, unchanging, unlimited happiness. When you think about that, then whatever is required on the path doesn't seem so onerous. It doesn't seem so scary. It doesn't seem so large. The happiness we want is much larger than what we have. We have to keep that in mind at all times. So, when you find yourself getting lazy, ask yourself if this is the best you can do. Is this how you show your desire for true happiness, by making excuses for your laziness? Try to encourage the diligent internal chatter that the Buddha talked about when he cited the reasons for laziness and the reasons for being diligent. The outside situations are always the same. You may say, "I've been traveling a lot," or "I've been sick," or "I didn't get much to eat this morning," and make that an excuse for not practicing. But you can also say, "I was traveling a lot. I didn't have a chance while I was traveling to practice, but now I have the chance. I've been sick. I didn't have the chance when I was sick, but now I have the chance to practice. When I don't eat much, the body's light. It's not weighed down by all that food. It's a good time to practice." How you talk to yourself is what's going to make all the difference. That's where you see wisdom in action. So try to get some wise voices in on your internal conversation. Inform them with the Four Noble Truths and teach them to train your desires so that they really do lead to the happiness you want, or, as the Buddha says, a better happiness than your desires can imagine. At the very least, encourage the desires that try to imagine that kind of happiness. Then make sure those desires actually do take control of your actions, so that, in accepting what really does lead to happiness, you can do what's needed to get there.